In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the dimensions of acceptance. So in the last lesson, we talked about reappraisal skills. And remember that this is a technique that we can use to take a second look at a situation just to see if we can amend its meaning or we can kind of wring out the excesses. So by developing reappraisal skills, we're also teaching ourselves how to substitute anger appraisals with more accurate initial appraisals. And the reappraisals can have an additional benefit, like improving your chances for long-term physical and psychological health, lessening your tension that goes along with this sense of uncontrollability, or even navigating like uncontrollable stresses, while at the same time avoiding the destructive mental health outcomes. We're also maintaining the effectiveness that we've learned in developing these reappraisal skills. So there's a tip that's going to give you an important new way to use the cognitive reappraisal method. So as you're going to see, this tip ties into the anger cycle. So Stephen G. Hoffman is a professor of psychology in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Boston University. And as an expert in cognitive behavioral therapy and the author of the Anxiety Skills Workbook, he shares his top tip for distancing yourself from anger. Anger is this normal human emotion that can arise from experiencing frustration or a violation of somebody's their personal space or their norms. And you can focus your anger on a person, including yourself, or an object, or it can just be a general experience. You can experience anger at varying levels of psychological arousal. And anger can range from short-lasting rage to long-lasting resentment. And rage often has this sudden onset, and it's associated with the perception of loss of control. But regardless of the type of anger, there is always a stimulus that's triggering it. So a cognitive appraisal that makes the stimulus personally meaningful and has a time course of the emotional response. And so once we know the cycle, we can know where to intervene to break that pattern. So first we can step back from our immediate response to that stimulus. Is the stimulus that important to you? Is it as personally relevant as you first assumed it to be? Step back from your immediate appraisal of the situation. Is it possible that your immediate appraisal of the situation was incorrect? Is it possible that somebody violated your space or norms unintentionally? Are there any contributing factors that might explain or even justify the other person's behaviors? So you might want and expect everyone to act fairly towards you. You might expect yourself to act with perfect judgment. So what do you make of it? What do we make of it when we get the opposite of what we expect? Maybe we join the Deacon Jones fan club and conjure up atrocities in your mind to strike back in fantasy, if not in actuality. When you're inclined to go in that direction, is it even possible to try another way? Psychologist Albert Ellis had 3 dimensions of acceptance, and it's an alternative to the harsh world of extension of blame thinking and parasitic anger. So these 3 acceptances are to accept yourself, accept others, and accept life unconditionally. So if you think that unconditional acceptance merits exploring, then there's some points that we need to consider. Acceptance is not the same thing as passive acquiescence. If somebody treats you unfairly, you can accept that it has happened because it did happen. You can assertively change what you can and accept the unchangeable, and also compensate as best you can when your options are less than ideal. We can also acceptance and awareness often fuse in present moment situations. So you're open to your experiences. You're pursuing experiences that you like. You don't have to like all that you experience. And then lastly, acceptance is not an anything goes philosophy. You don't have a license to do anything you want because I can unconditionally accept myself. Self-acceptance is not a right to act irresponsibly. So acceptance includes judging without being judgmental. That's kind of hard to do. But acceptance involves acting in a socially and personally responsible way. It includes believing that you're not responsible for your tendencies toward anger, but you are responsible for overcoming the excess anger. The language of acceptance is moderate but accurate. So an unpleasant event is just an unpleasant event. So we can think in words like prefer instead of I must have. Or we could use the word inconvenient instead of horrible. Or we can even use moderate language. So the word prefer is moderate language, and that's going to prompt a clear perspective. Harsh language like must have or horrible, that's likely to stir up the amygdala. So unconditional acceptance reduces the risk of creating secondary problems, like layering a problem onto a problem. So these secondary problems include blaming yourself or blaming other people or just blaming the world because you can't control what happened or how you feel. So acceptance is associated with fewer negative emotions and stressful circumstances. Acceptance philosophies invariably clash with extension of blame views. So you can't logically be extending blame and having thoughts to harm someone while accepting unpleasant situations as they are. So in this chart, you're going to compare the extension of blame and the situational and the acceptance views and see what you learn. So the first row is an example. So a flight attendant brought you a lukewarm coffee. You wanted a hot coffee. So you're going to fill in the remaining blanks with examples of your own here. But in this example, the extension of blame view would be that dumb flight attendant brought me a cold coffee. So a situational explanation view might be there's too many passengers on this number of to the number of flight attendants on this plane. Acceptance view would be, you know what, it is what it is. What is out of the control of the flight attendant is a shared concern for me. Cool coffee is better than no coffee. And what can we learn from this comparison? So in this situation, I found that I have many reasonable ways to view a situation. So you can use this acceptance exercise the next time something happens. Write down what your extension of blame view is, your situational explanational view, your acceptance view, and what you can learn from that comparison. Then you're going to write down what you discovered from that experiment that you can use to support future reappraisals using that, and write your answer on your own paper. Enlightened self-interest is a philosophy for advancing and actualizing yourself without needlessly harming other people. So without expecting reciprocity, you might selectively further the interest of others when you don't harm yourself in the process. It's normally in your enlightened self-interest to work fairly with other people and earn trust and boost your opportunities for cooperation where everybody's benefiting from a joint effort. And though it's desirable, reciprocity, like others acting the same way towards you, is not necessarily a requirement. When you don't expect other people to conform to your expectations, but you still hold them accountable for their negative actions, you move yourself outside of the parasitic anger cycle, and that is in your enlightened self-interest. So for your progress log, make sure that you are writing the answers down. What 3 things have you picked up from this group that you found helpful? What 3 steps would you take to move closer to overcoming anger excesses? What are you going to do to execute these steps? Like what's the process going to be? What do you hope to learn or have reinforced by taking these steps? And if you could make changes in the process, what would you do differently next time?